Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 30th, the final trading day of August. And, well, it looks like we're actually going to begin, pretty darn close to where we began the month, which was right over here on the 1st. So we closed right around the 52 range, 29.52 was the close on the 1st. So we're just slightly below that. So theoretically the month will end, but we've hit some just dramatic ups and downs in a consolidation, which we were looking at that consolidation period as being between this range, and it's pretty much held up well, quite nicely actually. We've had fairly decent DOC despite the big drop that we had initially. We ended up with a pretty solid buy return signal, and then we just had some fluctuations within a broader failure of a DOC steel reset. And in those cases, what I'm looking for are a couple of things always is that green over cyan, and this applies to 50K, 5K, doesn't matter. And ultimately, when I do have this inversion, you recognize that you're probably going to have a softening, which is kind of what we looked at right here. And what we were looking for was a really significant move, which would be the steel crossing below cyan where orange comes up above, and that led to that big drop that brought us below the 23%. And then quickly we got a little bit of a return back to it because we didn't get a failure of DOC red below, so there was still an underlying support happening there. And the shakeout had been pretty reasonable, and at the same time as that happened, we ended up started into a gold trend, and we were above 23%. So the question was, are we going to be able to break through the 50? So that became critical when you have rising gold and you're below the 50. It's problematic if you don't get exactly what we're seeing, which is the strong steel rising, and then an improvement in shakeout, at least when maintaining itself above the negative 13, which we always find is a critical. So now we're getting a P2 pivot, which took place back down here around 38%. And that just followed through, and it just kept going. It was pretty significant. Now, everyone will associate it with this and that rhetoric or whatever, but the trading range where we were really wasn't all that out of the question on the return from the dip that we had. NASDAQ looks pretty much identical, so they're pretty much back in line. The euro is getting very close to danger point, and it's problematic because you break that 110 and where that final floor is, we've got some room around 107, 105, but it gets sketchy below 105 on whether or not they can sustain it. I know Italy's still trying to form a government, and where that will go, Brit exit's looking much more evident now that you had Boris Johnson's move of suspending Parliament. So there's some worry signs for them there, which is problematic for the U.S. and stocks in general, simply because of the problem that it puts. But there's that fear element in Europe that's causing money to want to fly to America because it appears safe. So safety always wins out. And the fact that we're not seeing growth in oil as far as inventories means that there's still enough activity out there that's consuming it. But that's not going to stop gold because, again, the other safe haven has always been this. And so when all this turmoil with China and that began well before June, and that led to the beginning of this spike. And we talked about the central banks were buying up a lot of gold, and this is what happens when that happens because they can afford it and they buy up a lot. Turning to our 50K, there was not a whole lot to do. We started off with a little bit of weakness in the pre-market that had turned around real fast. We went cyan underneath red, always a buy in that setup, and then it just pretty much stayed there until we got up. Well, and coincidentally here, this is always interesting because, again, we talked before when we were at 27.70, we had support the other day. Here, right around 28.80, dipped slightly below it, it hit up against it. Once it broke above, it stayed there, went straight to 29.05, kind of bounced around the 29.05 as soon as it could stay above that. We went boom right up to the 23 that we had talked about before. Kind of rejected off that, and where did it find support? Again, exactly at that 29.05. Almost it was like, set up that way. And this was good on the DOC spreads that took place here because you had the early ones, but you were well above, 25 for magenta, then you were well above 15, but you started making lower shakeout highs. By the time you got to the last one, which took place right over here, you were well below the 15 threshold, making that much more reasonable. And I always look for that coupling of steel coming from above red and below, as well as orange crossing above. And as long as that happens within roughly 6 bars, that applies to 50K. There may be a little more latitude with the 5K on that, but sure enough, that's the one that led to the decline. And then we ended up with the strong dip. When you get the plus 13 with steel, actually it's like plus 13.2 technically, and that's what's put into the indicator, but for the paint bars. And then the dip below, that tends to be a pretty good one. In this case, the Diacon Paint 2 is looking for that secondary red pivot above the negative 13.5. I like it whenever you have this orange dip and you're above 13. It's usually where you begin the trend, but you can see it did fade off a little bit, and so it captured it on the return upside with the gold right there. That started the next move, going all the way back up. And when you get that situation where you've had green above in that, just because cyan pops above is not a guarantee. If the shakeout were still negative, then you could look at that. But when you move into a positive shakeout in that, the first thing I'm looking for is when you get steel that comes below cyan at that point with orange above. And if you don't have rising shakeout, then you know you can attack that one. In this case, you have just the opposite. You have a rising shakeout. But as we reach the peaks, we end up with the DOC spread without steel being above and then coming back below, like over here. Only you didn't get a DOC spread, which is why it continued higher. And it wasn't until we ended up with this second setup right over here that you actually had a pretty decent one, which is why it showed up as orange, because it was below, purple, because it was below, and you hit the ABM right there. And that's where we currently were, and now we hit the 50%, so it broke below the 29.23 just briefly right there, putting in additional pivots at that particular point. So there's still plenty of support there. Could get a little weaker here if you get steel coming below the cyan along with that orange spiking above it. That would be enough if I've got green below red. So you might see maybe a little bit further pullback, in which case I would be looking definitely at the 29.05. But in this case, we have rising lows to falling price. So where that meets and catches up is the first place that I'd be looking for support at this particular time. So really good action, and I think very effective. We can take a look even at the 50K, because that trade has been pretty decent from a little soft point. It didn't want to be caught in a big down, was out there, got back in. If it trades anywhere near where this is, it should put us right back exactly at the equity highs for the Opus 2 program. So pretty consistent with that. You are at the point here, though, we are reaching cyan. Azure meets gold, and usually that's the point where you look for an inflection. In this case, what it met right here was on an explosion. Right now we're meeting there, and if we had a DOC spread there, then I would be concerned about more of a dip. But you still have cyan cleanly under red, and no move up of steel or anything. So from my viewpoint, it's still fairly decent. So you may just see some modest back and forth action. That wouldn't be uncommon. We got a few positive extremes. The other one would be right around 28.80-ish would be the return all the way to this. That would be the 38% level right here. So we'll see if that's something that fills in now. You'd have to have a signal for it yet. We don't have that, so we'll just wait for it to develop. As always, though, very exciting. I'll be sending out renewal notices and that for the indicators, and sending them out over the weekend so that you'll be ready for Hong Kong in September. It's going to be exciting because I think some of the alterations that I'm working with, they're just in the form of the dots right now, but as soon as I convert them, it will change how the paint works in relation with the gamma function paint bar that we typically run. So all good, trade well. We will definitely talk again later. I will put up any other relevant charts as they become Interesting.